A gentleman is nothing if not courteous to others. And what could be more courteous than keeping your noise levels down, especially if you look cool while doing it? Well, enter the Silencer by America. This is James Donaldson. Thank you all for joining me, and I'm bringing you a video on, well, more on suppressors. This is the second video in my 3-video series, and tonight we're going to be talking about the differences between types of suppressors and why you might use one over the other. Gentleman's disclosure done. Let's move right into the meat and potatoes. So you're going to have really 4 main types of suppressors. You're going to have your rimfire, you're going to have your pistol, your rifle, and your shotgun. Now, rimfire obviously being for, rimfire only weapons. People might say, well, because in a moment we're going to talk about how you can fire those through other caliber weapons. People say, well, why do those exist? Well, you can make them so small and light that's worth it for them to have their own category. Now, of course, as I said, you're going to have some pistol options, and then you're going to have rifle options. And of course, right now I'm only familiar with one type, but shotgun option. Pretty impressive. More on that in a minute. So, let's talk multi-caliber cans. So, here's an example of a rifle caliber. It's a 30 cal can, which means you can fire any round 30 caliber below through it. 270, 300 Winchester, Magnum, 5.56. The list goes on. In fact, Gemtech has listed just shy of 100 calibers on their website, but they'll even tell you there's more than that. And then here's the Gemtech Gm-45. And of course you can do 40 caliber, 9mm, 22 long rifle, 10mm. The list goes on from there as well. And then you're going to have a whole nother region, which is pretty much, I kind of call them multi-cal whatever cans, where you can do rifle cans, and they'll also do pistol ammunition. So you've got your Hybrid 46, as well as your SilencerCo 36M, Griffin Armament Optimus, and Bushwhacker 46. The .46 bore cans are great because you can do 4570, through a rifle, 458 SOCOM, 450 Bushmaster. And then like a 36M from SilencerCo, you're looking at more 30 caliber weapons and 9mm, not the bigger bore rounds, pistol or rifle. So, no matter what though, I do recommend having a 22 caliber dedicated can, or rimfire dedicated can. Reason being, cleaning. Let's get into cleaning. Rifle caliber cans are self-cleaning. There's so much pressure buildup as the round passes through that when the round leaves, all the pressure is going to be following it and pulling everything that's in here out. So while they do clean themselves, 22 ammo being so dirty, I think it's better, and I really recommend to fire 22 ammo through a can you can clean. So that's where we get into user serviceability. This Gemtech Gm-45, called user serviceable, you can take it apart and clean it. Now that having been said, this is not a 22 dedicated can, and so it has some attributes that you see in some cans that are 22 dedicated and some that are not. Mainly the filth can get between this tube and the core, so that can make it very hard to break it apart. Just shooting 9mm and 10mm through it, I had to use vice grips and a strap wrench to break this apart, and I've heard of people having to take heat to them, so to get them open it can be a huge challenge. Some designs lend themselves to kind of keeping the filth in. So SilencerCo Sparrow 22 has clamshell pieces that fit around the core, and then you slide the tube over it so that it keeps all the filth in. It's easier to take it apart. And then some that have a baffle stack, so it's several pieces instead of that core. You're looking at conical baffles, or Surefire calls them for theirs pig nose baffles, and then you've got M baffles versus K baffles and some others. Those are all going to help keep the filth in. So those are things to consider with a 22 can. Plus, if you have your own 22 can, 22 is only dirtying up that can. You're not having multiple calibers dirtying up the same can that then is going to be a pain to clean. So, trade-offs. You're going to have long versus short. I don't really have any examples of lighter weight or heavier lighter weight or light duty, but there are cans that, such as the Gemtech Tracker. It's a very light can. They recommend you only shoot up to 10 rounds before waiting and letting it cool back to ambient temp. But it's also 11 ounces, which is incredibly light for a rifle can, especially one that can handle 300 Winchester Magnum. So, impressive. However, not full auto rated, while this can you can put on a full auto weapon and have no problems. Even if it sets on fire, the fire will go out, the can's life will go on. Now, disassembly, which I pretty much covered, but you're going to have cans that are user serviceable versus non-user serviceable. Again, it's all going to come down to what you're doing and what you're putting through it. Now you're also going to have round limitations. This can is very small, and it uses a set of what's called wipes, which are, you get a neoprene urethane. I don't remember which material these are made out of. It also has, I think, petroleum jelly in there, naval jelly. So all that is going to help contain the blast and cool the gases in a very short package. However, this is limited round count, 15 to 40 rounds, depending on the rounds you're putting through it. Meanwhile, this can you can shoot all day, and it's going to maintain roughly the same hearing attenuation. This can, same story. So, when it comes to round limitations, there you go. Now you're also going to have your dual verse dedicated, as I mentioned. You've got multi-caliber 30 cal can right here, and then this is a 5.56 dedicated. Can you put something like 22 long rifle through it because it's smaller, or well, really roughly the same size? Yes, but this is very much designed for a AR style platform, or at least semi-automatic rifle with the 5.56 round as its choice. So, going from there, composition. First, when it all comes down to it, you're looking at sound reduction versus durability versus weight versus size. Don't necessarily put sound reduction first. A lot of people say don't worry about it at all. I disagree, because if you live, say, in Florida, right at water level, and you go up into the mountains, you're going to be changing some variables. So, depending on how long you do that, or how often you do that, or maybe you live in the mountains all the time, you're going to have different results. So, if it comes to keeping it hearing safe, if you have a can at 139 decibels and then you go changing some variables, I would say that you should have worried a little bit about sound. Now again, what does it come down to? If sound isn't your first priority and the can you're looking at does these other things that are more important better, definitely get that can. So I'm not saying sound is important, but I do think it's a little more important than some people say it is. Now, composition. Something to consider when looking at different cans, because it's very hard to say how quiet a can is, especially to a shooter's ear. Some cans are going to sound quieter than others. Something to keep in mind that I've noticed both in my research of collecting many other people's data and then recently being able to collect my own data, I think heavier cans or cans with denser metals tend to reduce sound better. This example being, I've got these two rifle cans. I've ran them both on my Mark 18 on the same day, so you're talking about the variables are pretty much the same. So I'm not doing it in different locations. It wasn't stormy one day, so a lower barometric pressure versus a higher one, pretty much back to back. And this can probably has a little bit more volume. It's a ½ inch longer, and it's got some more material here, but it's lighter weight, and it's all titanium. This can is titanium, stainless steel, and Inconel, and it is very noticeably heavier, regardless, again, that this is longer with some more material on it. And granted, you would say, okay, there's more material versus this on the outside, so maybe this would add to sound reduction, but again, this is 100% titanium, which is a lightweight, very strong metal. Good metal to make a can out of, but this, with the density of stainless steel, is of course going to absorb the sound a little more, sound being nothing more than vibrations. Vibrations can move, that's going to be sound moving along. If the vibrations are being deadened, then the sound will not be as noticeable, depending on what you're doing or what's generating the sound. So, that is something I haven't really seen anyone else comment on, but something I've noticed when it comes to suppressors is the heavier or denser materials used in a suppressor, the better sound reduction it will be. So, things to consider. For instance, a lot of pistol caliber cans are going to have stainless steel for the blast baffle, and then aluminum, and then like aluminum tube. Interestingly, Gemtech is 100% aluminum, but the way their setup is, it really works well for them. Now, caveats and variables. So, one thing is modular suppressors. When you're talking about length, this is actually a 12-inch suppressor that you can reduce down by 2 inches at a time. So 12, 10, 8, 6. I think 8 is pretty well optimized, although I don't see many people running into that. Pretty much 12 or 6. I think 8 and 10 inch length is underrated for that can. I think it's a great happy medium, especially 8. So, point being that you can kind of set your suppressor up for what you're doing. They say it's like having 2 cans. I would say it's really like having 1.5. And this is coming from a guy that has a gun with 2 different grips. So, I have a little experience with modularity. Anyway, I think the modular suppressors are good, and because they're suppressors later in the line of technology, for no other reason than companies getting experience making cans, some of the modular ones tend to suppress a little better. Not the case for all of them. So, next, Rimfire multi-cal cans. I can't remember if I already mentioned it, but for Rimfire cans, there's different types of Rimfire rounds at different pressures. So, if you really just need a 22 long rifle can, I wouldn't worry about it too much, because pretty much any Rimfire can is going to do 22 long rifle. But if you do some other kind of oddball Rimfire rounds, that's where you need to pay attention, because not every can is going to be able to suit those needs. Granted, you could just get a Gemtech ONE for something like 17 HMR, I think that's one of them, 17 WSM, not all Rimfire cans do that, but this will. Either way, things to consider and watch out for. Now, an interesting thing that suppressors try to do, which, here's an example. So another pro tip, to make sure it's not backing off, keeping index of where your writing is, because otherwise the can will want to unscrew.
So point to that again.
So as you can see, the suppressor, this Gm-45, this is normal for any concentric can, it's not just this can, I'm not trying to hate on this can, but it tries to unscrew itself. So, using the words on the tube as a reference point is really good, but this Osprey, not only does all the weight down here prevent it from rotating all the way over, but it's a lot more noticeable when it kicks out to the side, especially when this edge starts ruining the view through your sights. So, kind of helps you keep in mind that's going on. Another thing to consider is your threading for your barrels and cans come in 2 different types, metric and standard. Metric being what a lot of guns are going to come from the factory when you're looking at 6-hour H&K and Glock, maybe 13mm for 9mm rounds. But your American version is going to be a finer thread at 1/2 by 28. Well, when you have a can trying to thread itself off, potentially causing a baffle strike, which is really going to strip your can and or gun, if you have more threads for it to go through, and it's going to take longer, then it's going to be stable longer and take longer to get unstable and let that accident happen. Well, 1/2 by 28, finer thread, it's going to be harder and take longer for the can to unthread itself than 13mm. Just something to consider. Now, as far as guns screwing themselves off, there are some anti-twist gas diversion methods I've seen. OSS suppressors, their muzzle devices have that where it just angles the gas in such a way that it kind of tightens the device back on. Same with how their suppressors work. And then Gemtech uses a G-core method in an integrally suppressed rifle, which we'll talk about in a second, where the core actually comes out the front. But it has these gas ports on it that also make it rotate the opposite way to help it stay on. Pretty interesting design. That having been said, integrally suppressed guns, that's basically a gun where the suppressor is fixed. So welded on or just part of the barrel. So where some barrels are short and you have to register them, they make the actual barrel length longer, so you don't. Now you still have to buy them like a suppressor, but it's a very interesting and at times very helpful setup to have. And all that being said, there are some other versions of gas diversion, but in the end, I haven't seen everything that's out there. So, now, the clothes. Why haven't you bought one yet? Anyway, as you can see, there are many different types of cans, and what your uses for it is very much going to help dictate which one you buy, and even then it's very difficult. So I do recommend starting with some multi-caliber cans, depending on what you want to do, and then going from there. As I talked about in the last video, pistols can become very unreliable with cans on them. So if you just want to start out suppressing your rifles, I think they should almost come standard or be a part of all rifles sold. Pistols a little more debatable. So anyway, if you need to try one out, some ranges do have these available. Granted, not a large variety of them. You're probably going to see a Surefire Canada range or SilencerCo. You're going to be a little more hard pressed to find a Gemtech can for whatever reason that is. So anyway, nothing wrong with Gemtech. They get plenty of military contracts, so good for them. But it's just something I've noticed and trying to research on my own. That said, increasing the amount of privately owned cans is always going to help increase the odds of getting the cans removed from the silly regulation that they're under. Please watch my other video if you haven't. It talks a lot about the details of cans. That having been said, a good way to try to get them off the NFA, National Firearms Act bill, is by joining the ASA. And granted, they have my money, they still don't know who I am. They are the American Suppressor Association. They've legalized silencers in 3 states and legalized them for hunting in 18. So, quite the organization. I'm a big fan. And that's all I have for you. So, I appreciate your time. Good ways to support me are by subscribing to my channel and giving likes to my videos, and of course supporting us on Patreon. That's going to go a long way, especially in upping things like production value, and of course getting some other cool things and opportunities to try stuff out so I can report back to you. So, until next time, keep your composure.